Back in 2019, there was this buzz going around about a new adaptation coming out of Shonen Jump. But instead of the battle, action, adventure that the magazine was known for, this one would be more focused on mind games, complemented by a much darker theme. Oh, okay, well, what's it about, you'd ask? And that's the thing. There's this twist that happens right at the beginning, so you're better off just going in blind. And when the Promised Neverland started airing, it delivered. The first episode left anyone who didn't know what was happening shocked, and every subsequent episode was more enthralling than the last. This was some of the best anime had to offer. So sure enough, March 29, the same day the season finale aired, Season 2 was already announced. And after getting delayed because of COVID, it's finally come out. And I won't even pretend to beat around the bush. It's not great. Now, after Season 1 aired, which, by the way, spoilers for Season 1, please go watch it, it's really good. There's just no way to not spoil how it ends, so I'm gonna give you this one moment because I'm literally about to say it. Okay, so after Season 1 aired, The Promised Neverland was one of the first manga I ever read because, well, the whole premise was escaping from this demon farm. And then they did, which just left me dying to know what the next season would even look like, you know? Now, I do need to come clean. I keep this between you and me, okay? Don't tell Viz or Shonen Jump. I may have pirated did it. Sinful, I know. I did end up buying all of the physical volumes, so retroactively I've cleared my name. And really what that means is A, it's been a while since I originally read a lot of the manga. And B, I've only read up until what's been published into a physical book, so forgive me now if my memory isn't perfect about some earlier things, or if my memory isn't great about what I haven't read yet. But here's a hot take. The manga kinda sucks too. Wow, I know, crazy. That is a bit of a hyperbole. The manga is really good up until a certain point, at which point I was just absolutely taken out of the experience. By all definitions, this is a spoiler for the manga, but I can assure you that without the proper knowledge of what's happening, it will mean just utter crap. And that's because even if you know what's going on, it's still a load of shit. Okay, so for context, Season 1 is about a group of kids at an orphanage as they plan and prepare an escape because getting adopted is all a facade for getting eaten by demons. Barring the demons who are really only introduced in episode 1 and become more of a looming threat, the story is well thought out and grounded in such a way that I feel like I, the viewer, could have come up with the ideas myself. By chapter 131 of the manga, Emma and Ray are pouring their blood into a cup of golden water with a flower in it while under the moonlight, in order to, I shit you not, get transported to a different plane of existence controlled by their own consciousness so that they could make a promise with a being that surpasses time and space named that. And I think this stands as a great example of a problem that all stories face: plot expansion. Plot expansion sits pretty snugly in between world building and plot progression. Where plot progression looks at how the story has changed in the moment, expansion is about the overall scope of the plot. Take My Hero Academia, for example. Deku getting into UA progresses the plot, but doesn't do a lot to expand the plot, at least not in a big picture sense. When the League of Villains attack at USJ, that is plot expansion because it introduces this whole new element to the story that can be explored. So, using this moment from The Promised Neverland, I want to take a look at what I think are the 4 main pillars of what it means to have good plot expansion. I'm sure you're at least familiar with the phrase suspension of disbelief. The idea that you have to stop thinking critically in order to believe and in turn enjoy a piece of fiction. Well, there was this writer back in the 1900s who liked writing these fantasy stories who would go on to challenge this idea, coining his own term secondary belief. that rather than suspending my disbelief in order to fit the story into the real world, authors should aim to create a secondary world in which the story is congruent with the rules and the ways of that subworld. Which is the exact kind of revolutionary thinking you'd expect from one of the greatest fantasy writers ever, J.R.R. Tolkien. I think that secondary belief and plot expansion go hand in hand, because secondary belief is so important to good fiction that it's vital that your plot expansion doesn't do anything to destroy it. Which brings us to our first point here, establishing. Something Tolkien stresses in his essay on fairy stories is inner consistency of reality, or ICR for short. And so the very beginning of a story is absolutely imperative to establishing this inner consistency, because whatever happens in the beginning will suddenly become the frame of reference for what's to come next. Episode 1 of the Promised Neverland, we're introduced to the demons who eat children. Now, for the remainder of the series, I will never question the existence of the demons because they were established in the first episode. While the Promised Neverland had done this a little bit for, we'll call him 3 because it's the only thing I can make out in this chicken scratch, they teased how important 3 would be by name-dropping him throughout the manga. To somewhat establish how powerful he is, there's this moment at the eye of the Kuviti Dala dragon, which, in its own right, is a WTF moment. Anyways, a random vision like that just wasn't enough for me to understand that 3 is both extraplanar and beyond time and space. It just wasn't well established enough for me to grasp it when it happened. When it comes to plot expansion, you should always be building off of what's already been established, either in exploring or developing. For a good example of this, look no further than The Promised Neverland? It's like I said, up until Goldwater, Bloodflower, Moon Portal, The Promised Neverland is good, and keeps a solid hold on its ICR. While we're still at Gracefield, one of the first issues the kids have to work through is what to do post-escape. We've already established that they're on a farm disguised as an orphanage for demon consumption, so logically speaking, this farm can't just be in the middle of a human city. So they come to the conclusion that it's a demon's world out there. The question of what exactly is a demon's world just sits in the back of both the viewers and the kids' minds. But come season 2 or chapter 38, we get to see this idea developed. It's a hallmark of good plot expansion to be easily able to trace back the connection from any point in the story back to the original. Doing this in very broad strokes for the Promised Neverland here, we start with kids on a demon farm, planning to escape, realizing it's a demon society outside the farm, escape, demon societies, then boom. Whenever the plot stops at a point to develop one of these ideas, it's, well, developing. Anyone on the anime-only side of the Promised Neverland may have seen the name Goldie Pond floating around. And anyone on the manga side is probably still mourning the loss, as it's getting completely shafted by the adaptation. For context, there was a deal made between humans and demons, the demons promising to leave them be, but in exchange the humans would leave them the farms. Goldie Pond was set up to be a refuge for any farm escapees, but was discovered by demons and turned into a secret hunting ground. What I love about Goldie Pond is it's an exploration. And that's when you create a wholly new plot expansion based off of ideas of another. That deal that demons will stop hunting humans? Goldie Pond takes that and explores it by asking, what would it look like if there were a demon who didn't follow that rule? Despite the fact that it feels like such a sidestep from the rest of the plot, it doesn't feel like an out-of-pocket move because it fits so well within the ICR of the Promised Neverland. Other notable examples of exploration would be like Gaara in Naruto. What if there was another kid with a demon trapped inside him? The time skip arc in Haikyuu asks, what does it look like for all of our characters after they graduate? In Soul Eater, Soul and Blackstar's duel with Death the Kid and the battle with Free explore the idea, what does it look like for a weapon and a Meister not to resonate? I've spent the last few months slowly chewing my way through CW's The 100. And if you've ever seen a CW show, then you know that every season has its own, almost self-contained plot. Which, for their superhero shows, works great. It's a different supervillain every season. But with the 100, the amount of one-upping themselves they have to do was far more pronounced. So the question becomes, how did they manage to pull off such crazy plot expansion? Let's start with pacing. Unlike with plot progression, pacing in regards to expansion is much less like running a marathon and much more like eating at a buffet. It's about keeping a healthy and digestible flow of information. Too much information too fast can overload the viewer, making it hard to keep track of all the different moving pieces of your story. This is one of the main problems plaguing Season 2 of The Promised Neverland. Taking place right where Season 1 left off, at a spot where the audience's knowledge of what's happening is at its lowest, there is a lot happening. After running from a giant demon in the forest, running from more sentient demons trying to hunt them, running into Musica and Sanju, they finally land at the bunker, which has its own slew of information. The phone call, the writing on the walls, elsewhere Isabella is reintroduced. And the bunker was supposed to be this moment of rest for both the characters and for us to be able to understand and digest what's been happening. But in the deviation from the manga, we only spend an episode's worth of time at the bunker before it's raided, and we once again have to move on. It's overwhelming. Too little plot expansion isn't bad inherently, but that time should be spent progressing the plot or developing out previous ideas in an engaging way. Else you risk the viewer feeling like the plot is stagnating. The start of Haikyuu Season 4 is probably the lowest point of the series in my opinion. So little feels accomplished for how long it drags on. While the majority of the team is back at school practicing, they spend little time on screen. The focus being on Kageyama, who is invited to an all-youth training camp, and Tsukishima, who is invited to Shiratorizawa for a camp specifically for promising first years, with Hinata feeling left out so he snuck in with them. Like I mentioned in my Witch Hat Atelier video, it's important to slow down and spend time showing our characters practicing and honing their skills. 5 episodes where the primary action is Hinata being a ball boy just was a bit overkill. On this spectrum, I think that Gold Water Blood Flower Moon Portal lands on the too much too quick end of things. Like on its own, it's already too much to take in, but then it becomes one of 3 plot points that runs concurrently, which is just icing on top of this plate of more icing. I think the 100 is able to manage its plot expansion so well because its seasons are so well defined. This is the original 100 season. Here's our main villain, this is the conflict we're building to. Now it's about getting from point A to point B. This is the Mount Weather season. Here's our main villain, this is the conflict we're building to, rinse and repeat. Other good examples would be like Dr. Stone, because whenever Senku builds something new, it opens the door for even more things to be made. But he doesn't just pull it out of thin air, we see him put all of the hard work into making it. For his bigger projects, he'll even make roadmaps of every step he needs to take. Kaguya-sama Love is War is a great example of less is more. Very little happens in regards to plot expansion, but it's just having so much fun along the way that we're okay with it. So if pacing is like eating at a buffet, then changing seasons in the 100 would be like ordering a whole seafood tower. Which brings us to framing. Framing is how the new ideas are being presented. Skip ahead here if you want the full Demon Slayer experience, because I'm about to drop a very vague spoiler for its Twitter trending episode 19. At the end of this very big and climactic battle, Tanjiro busts out this never-before-seen technique. And on paper that breaks our rule of establishing, but because of how it's framed as this last-ditch effort and something he's able to pull off because of his strong bond with Nezuko, and on the production side, the visuals and the music behind it all, they make it work. This is my biggest problem with Goldwater Bloodflower Moon Portal. For this big, never-before-seen thing that has no basis in the rest of the series, it's framed as, oh yeah, Emma and Rei are just gonna go do that thing now. Which we've heard of 3 before, so I was expecting this to be a big journey with a lot of trials and tribulations along the way. Nope, we're just gonna casually whip out this portal right here, and oh, while we're at it, this big riddle about the 7 walls that's been around forever. Yeah, so that's actually time and space itself, so feel free to just control this place with your own consciousness. Framing has to fit the inner consistency of reality, because there's a time and place for introducing new things casually. If in Jujutsu Kaisen, if they stopped to do what Demon Slayer did for all of their curse techniques, then it would go against the idea that Jujutsu is already a well-established part of their society. Another show that does this really well is Attack on Titan. By making their characters in the dark about so much, they wrote themselves a built-in out on this kind of thing. Because then so many of the big developments can be framed as shocking, new information, because it's not only new information to us, but to the characters as well. When it comes to writing fiction, authors should aim to create a secondary belief, a world in which everything makes sense according to the rules that govern it. But when the plot expands, you have to be careful that what you're introducing maintains the inner consistency of reality. It all starts at the beginning with a solid foundation, then building off of what's already been established, exploring and developing out those ideas, pacing it in such a way that keeps the audience engaged and framing things to fit the ICR. Handled correctly, then a story will feel well thought out and that there's always something exciting and new happening. But when plot expansion is forsaked, well, that's the exact moment that ruined the Promised Neverland.